Last week, we started our new series entitled Context, where we are looking at the most popular Bible verses throughout history and discovering the deeper meaning behind them, looking at the context of them. If you remember, we looked at probably the most famous, or the second most famous, in my opinion, verse in the Bible, and that was this, Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through him, or Christ, who strengthens me. We thought that this seemed like a verse that calls us to find strength when we need to pass a test or to play a sport. However, we learned that a better understanding of the verse is that God is calling us to contentment in all circumstances. Tonight, we are looking at another popular verse that you will recognize as once we throw it on the screen. You probably will recognize it when I say it's Romans chapter 8 and verse 28. And it says this, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. So why is this verse so popular? Does it speak to our fears? Does it reassure us and let us know that God is with you? You see, this verse is sometimes used to say, smile your cares away, or just snap out of it. You've heard people say, Romans 8:28, I'm too blessed to be stressed. We've all seen pictures and quotes and memes like a few of these here, again, that we have for you. All right? We make posters out of this verse. But to quote the Princess Bride, I do not think it means what you think it means. Have any of you ever heard of the Pollyanna principle or heard someone called positive Polly? Let me explain. The Pollyanna principle is a novel about a girl who plays the glad game or the happy game. It's where she finds something happy in every circumstance. It's where positive Polly comes from. Because according to the Pollyanna principle, the brain, your brain, processes information that is pleasing and agreeable in a more precise and exact manner as compared to unpleasant information. So then the question is this: do all things really work together for good? We're going to revisit that question here in just a few minutes. But taking this verse out of context can cause us to minimize tragedy. And let me give you a little bit of advice, a little bit of wisdom here for life. Do not minimize pain and suffering. Don't just throw this verse at people who are suffering. Jesus wept at Lazarus' death, but he also knew that his friend would soon be raised from the dead. So why did Jesus weep? Jesus taught us to weep with those who weep. Sometimes parents tell their kids to just rub some dirt on it and shake it off. I know I've been guilty of doing that before. This verse is sometimes the spiritual version of the just rub some dirt on it and shake it off. But let me let you in on a little secret, though. Most of the time when we talk about standalone Bible verses, we uncover that the verse doesn't mean what we think it means. Or we find that the verse has been taken way out of context. But with this verse, I'm going to show you that it means those things and so much more. Because typically we sell this verse short. So let's dig in and look at the context and the deeper meaning tonight. This verse was written by the Apostle Paul. Again, he wrote our verse for this week, but he is your author. And the Apostle Paul wrote this letter of Romans to the Roman church, or all the Christians in Rome. He wrote this letter from the city of Corinth. That's your context. And he writes this around the year 58 AD. That is your when. His intent was for the Christians in all of Rome, the Christians at the church in Rome, to read this letter. Now, the city of Corinth was an ancient Greek city which was very important from the earliest of times. It was taken over by the Romans in 146 BC, in 146 BC. Corinth was officially run by the Roman Empire under the rule of Julius Caesar. And we've all heard of Julius Caesar. But why did Paul write this letter? What was his purpose? The purpose of this letter was to present a systematic explanation of the gospel of Jesus Christ to the church at Rome and to encourage Christian unity and passion for evangelism and missions. But what is a systematic explanation? I'm glad you asked. That is a formulated thought or a explanation of something. Paul was trying to explain exactly what was going on with the gospel of Jesus Christ. Salvation had been provided by God through Jesus Christ, which must be received by faith and to work out your faith in practical ways. But the problem was the Jewish believers in Rome still felt constrained to observe the old religious laws. Paul was saying, no, the gospel of Jesus Christ is here now. And that's what you are to follow. So let's look at the surrounding verses to get a bigger picture. If you have your Bibles, you can turn to Romans chapter 8 with me. If you have your apps, you can open them up and go to Romans chapter 8. We will be in Romans 8, and we're going to begin with verse 18. It says this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits for eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption, and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoptions as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought, but the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. And he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called. And those whom he called, he also justified. And those whom he justified, he also glorified." So let's dig in here. In the previous verses, leading up to verse 28, the Apostle Paul tells us that our present sufferings are not worth comparing to God's glory, to the glory that is to come, and that we will be free from the bondage. The truth about the meaning of this verse is this, that it is about God's plan for eternity. That God's plan of redemption. That God has an eternal purpose. Job 42:2 tells us this. It says, "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." Job shows us that his purpose, that God's purpose, can't be frustrated, or I like that word, thwarted, by sinful people. That God has a plan for eternity, a plan for redemption. The most evil thing that has ever happened was still in God's plan. Look at what Peter and the other believers said about this in Acts chapter 4. It says, "For truly in this city there were gathered together against your holy servant Jesus, whom you anointed, both Herod and Pontius Pilate, along with the Gentiles and the people of Israel, to do whatever your hand and your plan had predestined to take place." Romans 8:28 isn't about our individual trials, but it does provide comfort that God is eternal. Nothing can take away our greatest treasure, that God's love for us expressed through the cross by His grace. We need to learn that the experiences in your life are designed to work together to build you into the image of Christ. The experiences in your life are designed to work together to build you into the image of Christ. That's the goal. Redemption. God can use all things, including sufferings we face in the present time, to teach us not to trust in ourselves, but to trust in Him and His plan. Again, Romans 8:18 says this, "For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us." God can even use our sin to teach us. Has sin ever worked out for anyone? No. Has it ever worked out for anyone's good? God gives us the rules, but we break them, and then we wonder where God is. He can use our sin to teach us to trust Him. Romans 8:28 isn't telling us to pretend that heartaches are good, that loneliness is good, that abandonment is good, or that death is good. What good is it that Johnny's parents got divorced? What good is it that Johnny's dad died of a drug overdose? What good is that? What good is that so-and-so died in a car crash at the age of 17? You're telling me that that is good? God can use these trials to teach us grace and love in ways that we may have never known. His eternal purpose is that we are to be conformed to the image of His Son. He has predestined that, and nothing can change it. Let me tell you a story about Joni Eareckson Tada. She dove into a lake at the age of 17, not knowing how shallow it was. She broke her neck and she became a quadriplegic. During Tada's 2 years of rehabilitation, according to her autobiography, Joni, she experienced anger, depression, suicidal thoughts, and religious doubts. However, during occupational therapy, she learned to paint with a brush between her teeth and began selling her artwork. She also writes this way, although now for most writing tasks, she relies on voice recognition software. But to date, she has written over 40 books, recorded several musical albums, and starred in an autobiographical movie of her life, and she is an advocate for people with disabilities. So let me ask you this. What will you do with your trials and your suffering? Do you believe that God is working your trials together for your ultimate goal, for your ultimate good, for those that He is calling you to serve? It is popular to interpret good as comfort and wealth. A lot of people like to use this verse as, hey, it's going to get comfortable. You're going to get wealthy. But the good spoken of in the next verse is about conformity to Christ. If we look at good as what we only see in this life on earth, we are missing the entire point of this text. Christ paid the ultimate price. In order to become like Christ, we endure some suffering and trust God through it. So remember our question from the start of this message. Do all things really work together for good? God's good and our good are not always the same thing. God's good and our good are not always the same thing. And what I mean by that is this, is that good to us equals being happy. We think that good means that we are happy. Happiness is temporary. Joy is eternal. But good to God equals being holy. And what it means to be holy is to be set apart, to be different, to be righteous. The phrase work together is really one word, and it's synergos in the Greek. This is where we get the word synergy. Synergy, when you put two or more elements together to form something brand new that neither of them could do on their own. God works out all things, even the bad things in our lives, in order to connect us with His Spirit to make us new. That's called grace. That's called the gospel of Jesus Christ. Remember that the experiences in your life are designed to work together to build you into the image of Christ. Let's pray.